Hello and welcome back to AP Psychology. I'm Miss Lee and we're still in Unit 9, Social Psychology. This video will be covering antisocial relations. By the end of this video, you should be able to predict the impact of the presence of others on individual behavior, and this is going to include in-group, out-group bias. You should be able to describe the processes that contribute to differential treatment of group members, again, including in-group and out-group dynamics, ethnocentrism, prejudice, bias, discrimination, scapegoat theory, stereotype, outgroup homogeneity bias, and mere exposure effect. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and grab your notes and let's get started. So let's start with a definition of what prejudice is. This is one of those words that we think we know what the meaning is, but it's very hard to put into words. Simply called prejudgment, a prejudice is an unjustifiable, usually negative, not always, but usually, attitude toward a group and its members, often of different cultural, ethnic, or gender groups. So it is an attitude. We talked about attitudes in our last video. Components of prejudice include beliefs or stereotypes, emotions like hostility, envy, and fear, and a predisposition to act or discriminate. So there are your varying terms when it comes to prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes. Stereotypes are a belief system. And then the discrimination is the action that happens as a result of prejudicial attitude. Prejudice works at the conscious and more so at the unconscious level. So in other words, prejudice is more like a knee-jerk reaction than a conscious decision in the opinion of most psychologists and sociologists. Do you think that this makes it more or less excusable? The quick answer is it makes it more excusable. However, when you really think about it, if this is all operating on an unconscious knee-jerk reaction level, then it's much more difficult to admit to because you don't know that it's happening, and it's harder to address if the person is unaware of their prejudicial attitude. Causes of prejudice can include social inequities, the haves versus the have-nots, social divisions and identities, emotional scapegoating, and then thought patterns, or how we experience cognition. Like the patterns of thought where we automatically tie one's behavior to their skin color. Thought patterns are simply habits, and these must be actively and intentionally broken. So this isn't something that just happens. This isn't something that just changes over time. There has to be an active, intentional intervention for these patterns to change. So let's talk about social identities, the in and out groups. An in-group is people with whom one shares a common identity, so a group that we consider to be part of us. An out-group are those perceived as different from one's in-group, them. So it's us versus them. An in-group bias is the tendency to favor one's own group. And this is fairly predictable when you're looking at social psychology studies. Another very famous study that a third grade teacher conducted was the blue eye, brown eye simulation. And in this simulation, Mrs. Elliott showed her students what discrimination and prejudice were after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. We will be watching a documentary that discusses the blue eye, brown eye simulation, but I encourage you to look into it on your own. It's a very interesting research study. The scapegoat theory is when prejudice is an outlet for anger by providing someone to blame. It's picking someone out of the group and attributing all of the blame to them. This has happened throughout history. If you look at history, the Japanese internment after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the blaming of Jews in Nazi Germany after the years of economic despair, and even more recently, the lashing out against innocent Arab Americans after the Twin Towers attack on 9/11. The cognitive roots of prejudice our brains use and love shortcuts or categories. So we quickly categorize people into groups based on easily identifiable traits. Most easily their looks, but also their behaviors and their social groups. And then we stereotype that group based on the few experiences that we've had. Another example here is the tendency to believe the world is just and therefore people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. We talked about this in a previous video. If something bad has happened to you, you must have done something to deserve it, and vice versa. This is known as the just world phenomenon. The danger with this phenomenon is that it can result in victim blaming. So, how do we reduce prejudice? There is a theory that's known as the contact hypothesis. This is where stereotypes and prejudices toward a group will diminish as contact with a group increases. But is this enough? Research has recently shown that no, it's not enough by itself. It's part of the solution and it's definitely a good start, but there must be some intentional educational techniques to address the social cognitions and perceptions. So let's discuss aggression. This refers to a range of behaviors that can result in both physical and psychological harm to yourself, others, or objects in the environment. This type of behavior centers on harming another person either physically or mentally. And so the question comes into, is it more nature or nurture that influences our aggression? There are some biological influences to aggression. Let's talk about genetics first. Animals have been bred for aggressiveness, for sport, and at times for research. Twin studies also show aggression may be genetic. In men, aggression is possibly linked to the Y chromosome. There are also some neural influences. Some centers in the brain, especially the limbic system, in particular the amygdala and the frontal lobe, are intimately involved with aggression. There are some biochemical or hormonal influences. Animals with diminished amounts of testosterone through castration become docile, and if injected with testosterone, aggression increases. We've also seen that prenatal exposure to testosterone also increases aggression in female hyenas. So these are specific research studies that have been conducted. But there are also some learning and cultural mechanisms that influence aggression. When aggression leads to desired outcomes, one learns to be aggressive. That shouldn't be a big surprise to you. This is seen more in individualistic than collectivistic cultures. Cultural undertones of violence have a huge impact on violent tendencies in a population. So when are people aggressive? Well, there is a principle known as the frustration aggression principle, and this states that frustration creates anger, which can then generate aggression, meaning people won't be aggressive unless they are frustrated. Most research has shown that this is a bit too simplistic in general a theory, but they do agree that the direct cause of most kinds of aggression is some type of negative affect or emotion. We've also seen cases of excitation transfer. This is when arousal from one experience carries over to an independent situation, so something completely different. The key is the independent situation must trigger the aggression. For example, you just finished your workout, and when you get home, your little sister has taken something from your room without your permission. You are more likely to respond aggressively due to your already heightened state. Aversive events and people can also make other people miserable. Studies show that those who are miserable have that effect on other people. And stressful environments. High temperatures, air pollution, and noise have all been found to increase aggressive tendencies. And that is it for antisocial relations. In our next video, we'll be covering prosocial relations. I can't wait to see you then. Bye for now.